You all know this guy, Rob Jollis, your moderator and participant, has been booked as a guest on hundreds of podcasts and is the host of Pocket Size Pep Talks, the podcast he launched 4 years ago.
Hey, okay, so, and I'm going to do double duty. I'm going to act as your moderator, and then I'm also going to join you on the panel a little bit. Really glad to have you because we've got sort of a host in one chair, a guest in another chair, and a PR person in the third chair. So I'm going to start us off, everybody, with some questions because they're the most common questions that we tend to hear, at least the hosts. And but there's about 4 or 5 of them. Start lining them up in the chat area. And Sarah, you keep an eye on them because I want to watch these panelists, particularly Ben. You never know what this guy's up to. So I'm going to keep my eyes on the screen. You keep your eyes over there, and we'll sort of work our way down. I'm going to put one in that you guys don't even know I put in, but it's just a classic question we keep getting, which is, I get, why should I be on a podcast? I don't know how many books I'm selling on these podcasts. It's not, I don't see, it's not Forbes magazine. I don't see these things, books flying off the shelf. Am I really going to sell? Is anyone even listening? Why do I want to be on these podcasts? Ben, you start us off.
Thanks so much, Robin. And by the way, go listen to Rob's podcast. Go be on Rob's podcast. It's excellent. You can't get tired of him. He's the best. And so I'm excited to be here. And it's great to see so many folks again. I was moderating a panel yesterday as well. You know, when it comes to podcasts, I look at it as there being kind of 3 or 4 different benefits that come off of it. So obviously, if you can go get on the big ones that have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads for every episode, well, those often actually do move the needle quite a bit on books. Those are, you know, heavily influential. They can impact other coverage you get. They can move the conversation. Those are really great. Only so many podcasts in that universe, though. But the way I look at it is I will do basically every single opportunity that comes my way, because sometimes maybe there's 10 people that listen to it, but one of those 10 people might run a conference that needs a speaker for something. One of those 10 people might run a business that needs some consulting work, or unless maybe people might also host a podcast where they have a much larger audience behind them. And so you never know kind of what is behind the, you know, what's on the other end of kind of the AirPods, basically, right? So that's one big piece of it. The other thing, the other 2 are basically there is this impression that you give off, even if you're doing the ones that are kind of the 5-10 people downloading them, that you're kind of killing it, right? You know, you're able to post about it on social media. It's a social media hit. It's an inbound SEO hit. It's all these great things that you can use for your own content that goes out there. And then finally, every single interview that you do is another rep. It's another piece of practice about telling your message, telling your story, and getting better at it each and every time. And so it's not a huge commitment, to be honest, on each individual podcast, but cumulatively, they end up becoming something that is very, very effective in multiple different ways.
Good. Danny, you clocked in about a minute long on that. But you're going to watch this panel, by the way. We are all on a communication shot clock. We're going to go about 90 seconds. Bing, 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 bing. So we can get a lot of questions. Good job. All right. Anne-Marie, take it from your corner. You got an author going, is this really, should I really be pursuing this? What do you tell them?
Well, the truth is, by the time you've come to me, you're expected to do PR, or else there's no reason for you to be hiring me. And I'm only going to present you with something that I see is worth your time. But you can't focus on, is this going to lead to sales? That's not how the book world works. It's not how PR works in general. But as Ben said, some of those top tier podcasts, they are going to do the trick. They are going to sell you some books. They're going to get your name out there, and they're going to help you get booked on other media. So that's important too. Everything that Ben said is spot on. But you also, one thing that's really important for any author, whether you're nonfiction or fiction, is honing your message. Understanding how to speak to your audiences is very important. And a lot of authors, they don't know how to do that yet. And so take a podcast that really speaks to your readers, and you can have some really good conversation. You could understand what your readers, what your audience is looking for.
Outstanding. And good shot clock, by the way. I like that. You know what I call that, Anne-Marie? I call it ring work. It's like a boxer. You got to get in there. You got to spar because
Yes.
maybe this one show isn't going to get you, the 10,000 downloads, but now you're getting light on your feet in the ring. Now you're learning how to economize your words, get at those answers, put some punch behind them. So, yeah, I really endorse the ring work. Let me stay on our shot clock here. How about connect with influencers? How about reaching perhaps a new audience? How about, like you said, content for your website? How about there's just so many reasons to do it. Even in your Google searches. Okay.
Mhm.
How about moving the needle on the Google searches? Are you getting tired? We can keep going. As Al Pacino said, I'm just getting warmed up. Okay. There's plenty of benefits there. And, but listen to the show first.
Yeah.
Because if poorly
Yes.
produced,
Yes.
don't go on the show. But like I said, if it's well produced, I would go on that show because as a host, guess what I'm doing when I get pitched? I'm asking Anne-Marie, send me 2 podcasts this person's been on. And I'm listening to production value, etc. All right. I'm hitting to my shot clock. That's it for me on my 90 seconds. Let's go to the next question. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. The materials that we need. Okay. What materials do you typically prepare when you're pitching a podcast? We'll go to our professional guest. Okay. You take us first, Ben. What are you typically preparing?
Well, it's funny. I try to keep it as organic and streamlined as possible when I'm doing outreach for something. So I didn't work with anybody in terms of a booking agent or PR for the stuff that I was doing. Not saying you shouldn't. I know that Anne-Marie does excellent work, and there are lots of reasons to do one path or the other. But for me, I basically went and I said, let me go find the friends that I have that have written similar books. Let me go to their podcast list, or they've even just sent it to me. They sent me their spreadsheet. And I would go and say, who's still publishing, who's still, who's relevant to the stuff that I'm doing. And I would reach out to them and say, hey, I saw you had my friend so-and-so on your show. Great episode. I wrote a book that's coming out in a few weeks that would live next to theirs on a bookshelf. Would love to chat about it if you're interested. I didn't do a whole giant pitch. I didn't send every single thing in that first thing. It was that one email in the beginning. But then I also prepared for when the time comes. I did prepare kind of a one sheet that was my bio. I have my bio in one sentence. I have my bio in a paragraph. And then I had a link to like my long bio if they wanted to go find that on my website. And so I had that, social media links, a few different photos that I would just kind of rotate through giving to people because everybody wants a photo for something. And then, sometimes people had specific requests. I often would send the manuscript, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that was pretty much it. I purposely didn't go too big on the infrastructure for it because I wanted it to feel more organic in terms of my outreach.
Perfect. And you're going to get probably, it's show by show, right, Ben? Different hosts are going to be asking for different things. So we'll keep an eye on that. Jump on in there, Anne-Marie. What do you say?
For me, the press materials, whether it's a pitch letter, or less so a press release for podcasts, but usually that one sheet or that I call them booking sheets often, where it could also, I think it's important to detail the specific topics that you can speak to. And you want to hook those topics to what makes you different. Why does this particular podcasting audience want to hear what you have to say? And if you can, try and hook it to something current that's going on, whatever state of your particular industry, what's happening now.
Excellent. And I really love that hook part. I'm on now from the host chair. I'm going to tell you right now, you're helping me. You're doing my job a little bit because guess what I'm doing when I'm looking over your materials, trying to figure out what the hook is. Okay. If I can't figure out the hook, I'm having trouble booking you. Okay. No hook, no book. Let's put that one up on the wall. Okay.
I'll add one more little thing too, which is on top of that, which is really good, making it easier for the host. Some hosts will ask, hey, what are the questions I can ask you? I personally am not always a huge fan of that type of format because it just ends up being, it ends up being kind of a hint that they're not actually reading the book, that they're not actually kind of doing the homework for it. But just think of 5 questions that you really want to answer and that you can answer with absolute home runs, and have those prepared. That can be, I've seen people include that in that little sheet that they do when they send it away, or they just have it, like I just have it in a separate note so that when somebody does ask me, oh, what are the questions that you want that we could ask you? I have those ready at the go-to.
Can I add something to Ben? I
yeah,
think
please.
what Ben said is really important. Also, perhaps they didn't read the book, and that's okay. But they're preparing themselves, and podcasters aren't necessarily journalists, right?
Mhm.
So they may not always get those questions that they should ask. And so it is helpful to provide them with those questions. And I think anyone, if you're going out on the PR circuit and you're looking to get booked on podcasts or radio or television shows, have those questions available, written out, and your responses as well.
Yeah, listen, the 3 of us are going to go on the road and do this because it's point, counterpoint, counterpoint. You're getting 3 completely different angles. We've just got 2 different angles on the question. I'm going to tell you where the host stands on this one. Absolutely, I like the questions written out. I don't want to break your hearts, but I'm doing a lot of podcasts. I can't get through everybody's book, and even if I did, I might be asking you questions like I remember I did hundreds as guests. I'd have them ask me questions, and I'm rolling my eyes, thinking, "Okay, it's a good question. You're nowhere near really the heart of this book, but I'll answer it." And some of these podcasts are short. Take the guesswork out, Ben. When they read them, no worries. But it's an insurance policy. And think about it. Remember when I slipped in that real quick? If nobody in a Q&A asks you a question, what's the best question you could ask you and ask yourself it? When you do that, and in my instructions when I prep a guest, I'm asking for them and begging them, don't write out the answers. I want a very authentic response, but give me something to take you right to the heart of the message. And then I promise I'll go 2 questions deeper. But now we take the guesswork out. So Ben, you're on good turf there. Believe me. There's some hosts that won't want it. Okay. This one does. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
What I'll say is that's actually a really good model. The worst podcast I ever went on, they'll remain unnamed. They asked me to give them the 5 questions. They asked me the 5 questions out of order and had no follow-ups whatsoever. So it's like a curveball I get with just like this deep. The first thing I get on there, this person had no research ahead of time. They asked me like the 4th question that is a completely like nuanced thing that's more like what, or like the tools you could take away, something like that, when they didn't ever talk about like the thesis of the book or the problem we're trying to solve or any of that type of stuff. So be aware, you're going to end up in awkward situations like that. The questions, as you get the reps in, when you have the 5 questions that you've written, it does end up being a good kind of, it raises the floor on the quality of the podcast. I'll put it that way. Right.
Yeah. Right. And Ben, you bring us back to another point. Let's hit it again. If you're going to be on a podcast, listen to the podcast. Okay. You'll get, first of all, you can see, okay, it's going to be a wrestling match, but all right. Or you might actually get sort of the sense of the rhythm of that host. You get their style. Some hosts, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but some hosts like to talk a lot. Okay. But given that, okay, this guy wants to have a conversation. Some just want to let you go. Let me finish this question off from my angle, because we got a nice debate on those questions. Don't forget your social media numbers. Don't forget how you pitch the book. Sometimes I'll look at a topic and go, I'm not really sure. 200,000 followers on LinkedIn, you're in. Okay, I'll make you interesting. So not everybody has huge numbers, but just think you're selling yourself. Put that big idea down there, that kind of what's in it for the audience. Shorten that prep time for the host a little bit by giving them the questions that take you to the heart of it. And last thing, shorten those bios. We will lose audiences reading those bios. So now I have to shorten it for you. And I don't always know. Might insult you. I might cut something out. No more than 3 sentences. And don't make them very long sentences. I know your tricks. Okay. All right. We got on that. But all right. Let's okay. Now this is a big one. So put your coffee down and really pay attention, because I know it's a question a lot of you ask. All right. Strategies to get booked on podcasts. Okay. Now there's 2 approaches. Okay. One is working with booking agencies. We'll start with that one. Okay. And then we'll move to some ideas on how to get booked on your own. But let's start with the booking agencies. Ben, do you have any contact or relationship with them, or were you doing these all on your own?
I've done all of my own on my own. In kind of past lives, I've touched on a couple different PR agents and booking agencies. I heavily, again, as I mentioned before, I heavily leaned on my own network of fellow authors and said, okay, who do I know that has been on this show? And I'll give you a quick tool. I'll give you, 3 tools for that. Number one is go to their website. Almost everybody has a podcast page. I have some homework that I have to update mine. I haven't done it in about a month. On Everybody has got the little links to their podcast stuff. Number two, ask them. Almost everybody who's doing this has a spreadsheet where they're happy to kind of share with folks what they've done. And the third one is a site called listennotes.com. So listennotes.com is a podcast search engine. Type in somebody who you know that wrote a great book that would be your book's friend, and you'll see all of the interviews that they've done. And also, when we mentioned that Rob's podcast is the top 2%, that's where that number comes from. They also do a kind of a ranking of the different types of not so much a ranking, but a general kind of score sort of on the different types of podcasts, the average length, the different demographics of the listeners. That's a really helpful way to get familiarized immediately with different podcasts.
Yes, I'm a liker of Listen Notes because they take good care of me on Listen Notes, so that's where I go as well. So you hit it perfectly. I'm interested, Anne Marie. I'm gonna give you bonus time on this one, okay?
Okay.
Because I want to hear from you a little bit on this one. Because we're going to talk about trying to pull this off ourselves. When do we reach out and ask for help?
When do you reach out? When do you hire a publicist, or when
Yeah,
do you-
and even more to that, just kind of the whys and the hows and the wheres there. This is in your
so,
wheelhouse.
so, I mean, ideally, we want to know about your book 6 months before it comes out, so we can be prepared. So we can be prepared to get those arcs out to the wish list media, so that we can hone our messaging, so we can figure out additional news angles to pitch you to other podcasts and other media. So 6 months is sort of what I personally like, what I hear from a lot of other publicists. But there could be others. The book has a long life cycle, especially in the nonfiction world. So there are times when authors do hire me after their book is launched. Maybe that launch wasn't as they planned, and maybe things are, they didn't get the press that they desired, or the book is not selling at all. And then they say, let me hire a PR firm, let me hire a marketer, let me see what opportunities are out there for me in my book. Mm-hmm. Remember, at the end of the day, I am selling the author, and the book is the asset. So, I can promote the author all day long. You guys have these brilliant businesses, thought leadership. It's you I'm selling.
Right. Okay. What about just the podcast booking agencies? Okay. Not a PR firm. This almost sort of like a hybrid that's crept up into the industry a little bit.
Yeah.
And I
I don't know much about podcast booking agencies, but I will say booking on podcasts, from my perspective, as practicing, PR for the last 25 years, it's a very different game. I'm used to working with producers and with journalists. So, I would say reaching out to podcasts takes me double the amount of time than reaching out to any TV show, because we're really trying to cater to that host and that producer, and really trying to be authentic in why that podcast needs to have our clients on.
Okay. Ben, any familiarity with just the podcast booking agencies? It's a slice of a PR firm.
So I'll tell you, I've encountered a few folks that run those different things, and actually, you know how you're going to encounter them? They'll have podcasts, and you'll see people on their podcast. And I've had the I've had the podcast of somebody, and then they want to follow up with a little chit chat to upsell me on their agency for booking podcasts. It worked. The thing about this is that it's a lot of legwork. As Anne-Marie was saying, it's a lot of work to get booked on these things. I don't think there's that much kind of, honestly, magic behind it that you have to have. It's more just the persistence of anything. I will tell you, there's a couple other websites I wanted to mention. So there's matchmaker.fm, and I think it's podmatch.com. These are apps that allow you to kind of do the online dating with the podcast, if that makes sense. You can make your profile as a guest, podcast can make their profile, and you can apply to, they can reach out back and forth. I will say those have a lower hit rate than just kind of reaching out if you know somebody on the podcast. They tend to be a slightly lower quality. It tends to be that, it's somebody's, just graduated college and they're starting a podcast as a side thing and they get tried. But if you're looking to just kind of test the waters, get the reps in and, get the numbers up, to be honest, that's a good way to dabble a little bit. Some of them charge you money. I wouldn't spend too much money on those things. But if you want to just get your first bite of the apple, you can go and try those places too.
All right. I'm not supposed to be sneaking peeks at the chat area, but I did because I've noticed that we've got a Jennifer who's talking about came in contact with podcast interview marketing. Okay. Yeah, no, the answer is no. I haven't heard of them. They haven't pitched me, but I've been pitched by about 15 of them. Podcast bookers, Command Your Brand, Interview Valet, Experts on the Air, Lemon Pie. There's a lot of them out there. I can even give you sort of pricing if you'd like, because I'm going to tell it to you. What you're going to get from these, if you go sort of hybrid, just a podcast agency, and I'd be cautious, okay? But run you about, and I'm just giving you an average now, run you about $650 a month. And what I did was I actually looked at a couple of the packages they're putting out there. They'll help you with a one sheet. What they're promising you for $650 a month is 2 bookings a month. Okay. That's why we're going to, in a moment, move into maybe some ways that you can book your own podcasts. But just to give you an idea, that's not quite what a publicist is going to cost you. And yet I can tell you it's a little bit of the low hanging fruit there. But I see them, they're popping up all the time, and some of their guests are good. They pitch me some people who I really like. I almost want to wink and go, "What are you doing here? Step it up."
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can get 2 bookings with 10 emails, right? Like you can spend a half hour and get 10 bookings instead of spending, $650. But
I agree. Yeah. That's why I wanted to shift to the question of how are we going to do this on our own? How do we book our own podcasts? Okay. And Ben, once again, I'm going to start with you because you're the master booker of podcasts for yourself. Yeah, selfish guy. How are you doing that?
So I will say the best when a few have come in to inbound, and those have been actually two of the top 5 biggest audiences that I've gotten were ones that were inbound. They came out, they read my book, or they heard me somewhere else speak or something, and that turned into the one recently was called The Art of Manliness, which is like a top 0.005, like it's in the top 100 podcasts, something like that, right? So that one, Brett from The Art of Manliness reached out. Great inbound. He loved the book. We had a great conversation. It was awesome. That's the rarity, though. That doesn't happen as much. That will happen as you start to get out there more and more. So that's when we talk about what are the positive kind of after effects of doing these things. Talk about how do I actually kind of reach out? I mentioned where I find the people to reach out to is kind of the friends list. What I will always do, just kind of an order of operations, is I'll make sure, number one, that they're still publishing. So you go to check listen notes or Apple Podcasts and say, have they published something in the past 60 days, 90 days? Some people go for seasons. They don't do it for a while. But if they haven't posted anything since 2022, don't waste your time. So make sure they've posted something in the last bit. Yeah. And then we want to go to my order of operations real quick on terms of how I reach out. I try to do their website form first, if they have a website form, because that's less likely to hit spam. It also gives you the justification where 2 weeks later, if you wanted to, or send an email. And then so the email follows up on that. And then my order of operations is if I still want to kind of try one more time, a couple of weeks later, I'll reach out on LinkedIn about it. So you can't really go backwards on that. It kind of feels like you're really being pushy, but if you're going in that direction, it feels like you're respecting their process for something.
Good. What do you say, Anne-Marie?
Sorry, my Alexa was talking. So we have some very fancy databases that we spend a lot of money on. So we often have email addresses for producers, for hosts, things like that. And that's generally my first line of communication is I go straight for the email. I also do use the website when I can, and then I may start to stalk you on your social media, but I'm very careful about reaching out on social media. It's usually, again, that persistence, following up again via email. Maybe you have a new subject line, maybe you have a new lead paragraph,
Mhm.
or maybe you have a fresh topic that you can speak to that's very compelling.
So actually,
Perfect.
on that note, the thing that I used as the follow up was I was beginning the outreach prior to the publishing. I know there was a question about this in the chat. I began the outreach months and months before the book came out. I did the outreach, and then once I got the final PDF, I went around and basically said, "Hey, I just got the PDF. Would love to send that to you if you're interested." And that was a good natural excuse to be able to kind of ping everybody a second time.
Good. All right. Let me roll into that question. And I'm going to talk even faster than Ben talks. Watch this. Okay. Ways to get booked on your own. First of all, create an engaging online presence. Okay. That's where we hosts are going to look. Identify the podcast you want to be on. Ben, really good point about listen notes, but it's just because you can search, you don't have to search their report card. They'll give you a percentage of downloads, but you can go into your particular area, leadership podcast, whatever your podcast is, it'll sort of put you into a small area. Uh, Big one for me, follow the podcast on social media and engage. Okay.
Mhm.
I have very not selfish, stingy. That's the word. Stingy LinkedIn followers. They don't like as much as I like. They don't comment as much. Hint, hint. When I put, every podcast, I'm putting out 90 seconds of video and putting something on there. When somebody puts a like on there and when somebody puts a comment on there, it catches my eye. When you do it 2 weeks in a row, I actually know your name. Okay. Well, I told you yesterday, when you do that 5 weeks in a row and send me 2 brownies to my house, I don't care what you do. You're coming on the show. Actually, it's not quite that. I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday. The guy who came on the show was talking about this guy with the brownies, and they kept liking things and writing comments. Really enjoyed that. Got this out of that. It played me like a fiddle, believe me. But one of his questions was, ask me what I invented. And I said, I was like this, what did you invent? And he reaches out and he goes, this. Okay. I happened to be holding it and drinking out of it while he was talking about it. Guy like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, invented the lid. Okay. For whatever. Point being, he turned out to be a great guest. Engage with, not every show. Engage with the shows that you think you're going to be a good fit for. Find the right person to contact, like Anne Marie was just saying, and create a legitimate email pitch. Audrey, I believe you're with us today. Audrey created a really nice video of why she should be a guest on the show, about 2 minutes long. Audrey, unmute if you're with us. You have
Here I am.
Yep, you got a video on that, right?
Yes, I do.
Sure did catch my eye. Now I not only know what my guest, I'm actually got the feel and the energy that Audrey puts out. Now she becomes a compelling person that I want to talk to. All right, I told Ben he's got to watch the time. I got it also. So I'll clip it at that. But there's more. There's plenty you can do on your own to engage. Okay. Keep an eye on it. All right. I know we got a bunch of questions. I have some more here, but I feel like we should dip in. We'll go back and forth. Sarah, who do we have on the line?
Yeah, so we have Bennett who asked, can you discuss the pay to play model? One podcaster said I needed to pay thousands of dollars to have the privilege of being on their podcast. Thoughts?
Easy,
Don't do
Ben.
it.
Easy, big boy. Okay. Well,
When you do the outreach, what's going to happen is a small percent, but they're going to be there, are going to say, hey, we're doing a $250, a $500, a $1,000, whatever it is to fee to be a guest. There's no benefit of any individual podcast that is worth, unless you're talking about a ad on This American Life or whatever. There's no benefit that's going to be worth that to you. They say, oh, you can promote that you've been on a podcast, this and that. Don't do it. It's not worth the money. You're going to get a million things that are going to be free, which are going to be better. Also, everybody else that was on that show also paid. And so they're also the suckers that did that for them. Nothing's 100% wrong with it. Some people have reached out about it. If you go on Matchmaker, what's going to happen immediately after you sign up is like 5 people are going to message you being like, we want to invite you on this show. And it's a $500 fee. the one version of this I've seen that is excellent that I really, really loved, and I actually made a LinkedIn post about it when it happened to me, was in order to dissuade of just being kind of like sprayed with a million PR pitches that weren't from real, that were just kind of from spam bots or whatever. Somebody asked to donate to a charity and send them the receipt for it, and just like $10. And I was like, I love this idea. So I donated to their charity, said, hey, listen, I'm real. Here's the receipt for it. And it was such a good way to be able to, do the effect of kind of like culling the list, but also, not being kind of hacky about it.
Good. Okay. Interested in your response to this one, Anne Marie.
I mean, I don't understand it personally, even when clients ask me, should I pay for this? And it's sort of, a lot of the times, if you're not spending any money on your book, you haven't hired PR, you haven't hired a marketer, you're not doing any advertising, you're not doing, quote unquote book tour, why would you even consider paying $2,000 to be on a podcast? And also, if you're really looking to get media, to get quality media around your book, paying for that, paying to be a guest on a podcast that you probably know very little about is just, it's completely unreasonable. I wouldn't even entertain it.
Agree with both on the panel here. I actually was mentored when I started my podcast by a guy out in California who I helped him write a book. So he helped me with the podcast. That's his model. And it's a couple $1,000s to be on. And he is, I've checked him out in listen notes. His numbers aren't even that great. I think it's almost a vanity move from people that really aren't paying attention to the podcast industry. I don't, yeah.
I agree with you. It's like vanity presses out there. This is just another one of those things.
Yeah. Okay.
And it makes you wonder, though, check out the quality of their guests as well.
And actually, most of them are not very good guests. That's why they've sort of fallen into this. I know nothing about podcasts, nor do I want to spend a second learning about them. Take my money. Typically not the best guest. Okay. Yeah. Sarah, who else is on the line?
Mary Ann asks if you have any suggestions for those of us whose books are not yet published, but they have 20 years of C-suite experience.
Yeah. So, by the way, there's no wrestlings from Ben. Ben is permanently going first, apparently. Go ahead, Ben. What do you got?
Yeah, so here's the question: do you have the book kind of in the process? Because I would say my book came out in October. I started doing the outreach probably in June. I really should have done it in March, because then I would have had more podcasts that came out right when the book came out. I would have had more podcasts in the month leading up to it. So don't be afraid saying, hey, my book's coming out next year, I can't do any podcast. As long as you have the book coming out and you have, a lot of people want the cover and the pub date so that they can like use that as a, in the key art for it. But don't be afraid to kind of do lead time for it. The other thing that I have said, and I've told this to like my students, is like a little hack. You don't have to always have a book to be booked on a podcast. Go write an article somewhere. Go get it published. We had a whole session about guest articles before. Get it published somewhere, industry magazine, industry blog, whatever. And then take that article, turn around to go to 10 people who have podcasts and say, hey, I just wrote this article about topic XYZ. Would love to talk about it. Would you have me? And a lot of people are still going to have you because of that, if it's an interesting topical piece of work.
Thank you.
Perfect. Anne Marie, you want to jump on with any of that?
I mean, I think you can reach out very early on. I do agree that, yes, having the cover of your book would be very helpful when you approach podcasts early on. But I don't think it's a bad idea to go out there if you have that 20-year C-suite experience with some of the topics you can speak to, build up that portfolio of your podcast engagements before you start going into the book. You may have completely different opportunities when the book comes out, but at least you're doing some early press to get your name out there a little bit more.
Thank you so much for that.
Good. Well, I mean, I didn't even get to answer my part. I agree with those two. That's my answer. No,
what would you add?
Very little. I think that was very well done.
Okay.
Quite frankly, I've always been a believer that you never stop pushing for your book, and even if the book isn't out, what are we getting? Ring work, right? What are we getting for those of us who speak? I can get my ring work in front of an audience. Yeah, but unlike a comedian, there is no open mic. I got to do it to a paying audience here. or I can start working it out on some of these podcasts. So
Mhm.
quite frankly, it's ring work. I just can't think of a time not to. If the podcast is right, I'm on.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Okay, cool.
Rob, I have to say something. You said something interesting. You never stop pushing for your book. I agree with that. Never stop pushing for yourself, right? At the end of the day, you never stop pushing for yourself. Hopefully there's going to be other books. Maybe you have your own podcast, maybe you have your own website, whatever that may be. Just don't stop. Everything that you do to sell your business, to sell yourself is likely going to be useful in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
So
And I
helpful.
see, yep, perfect. I see the polite Martin who loves that electronic hand. Okay. He's the electronic hand guy of the meeting. Okay, Mr. Hand, what do you got for us?
Thank you. I wanted to talk about what you think the ROI on podcasts are in terms of hosting it for yourself. So I think only one person on this panel hosts his own, but Anne-Marie, you probably have clients that host their own, and certainly our third panelist goes on lots of people who host their own. Where do you see that it's worth it? When have you seen that it's worth it? What is the way to measure whether or not you put that amount of time in and get the return on it? And specifically, Anne-Marie, when would you suggest that people do undertake that and not undertake it based on some of the other things that you're advising that they do?
Martin, you're only allowed to ask it one question. You really wrap that thing up there a little bit. But I'm the moderator and I want to call on me first. Okay. Yes, that's right. It's the most common question that I get. How much money are you making on that podcast? What's your return on investment? Everybody thinks it's about getting an advertiser.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, usually the advertisers like to come in right around that 1.5% point, 1 to 1.5% of downloads. So for my case, I'm getting close. I have absolutely no interest in ever having an advertiser. I don't want to have a conversation with you, Martin, in the middle and say, hang on 1 second, Martin. Brill cream. A little dab will do you. Now, back to Martin's talk, okay? I'm just not going to do it. And what, $50 a month? But here's where the ROI is, Martin. The ROI is if we're building a business around our book, which we've been talking about for a couple of days. Now change the question, ask me, how many presentations, how many seminars, how many workshops, how many keynotes have I gotten out of this? How many influencers have I put on who I can tell, I don't want to corporate drop, but I'm top 100 company on the Fortune 500. Got a very high level person who I did some work with 5-6 years ago, who I let them know I was having a podcast. He wanted to be on, loved being on. Got to reconnect with this individual. Oh, what a coincidence. We're doing a workshop in a couple of weeks. Okay. That's what for me personally, and this isn't the only answer, but for me personally, Martin, that's where the ROI is. It's connecting. You wrote that book to be a thought leader. Continue being a thought leader. You wrote that book. People don't realize this. I'm a blog writer for 15 years. I sit in the closet. I can write a blog. You do a podcast. You start meeting very interesting people. Things that might shape the things that you want to write about. I know that isn't ROI, but I pay for that. But that's where the ROI is. To me, it's as a professional speaker, it's finding those gigs, sourcing those gigs. This helps me do it and it helps me reconnect with clients and connect with clients I've never connected with before. Okay. Sorry.
And I'll say, so for me, I wish I started a podcast like 5 years ago. Or I think maybe I'll do one if I ever do one in a year or two. So there's times when it makes a lot of sense, and there's times when maybe it might not make a ton of sense. If I started a podcast 5 years ago, if I was like Rob and I had hundreds of different guests, here's the thing. Every one of those guests kind of owes you a favor. And so when your book comes out, you can email every single one of them and, do the door knocking, right? Don't just blast them, every single one of them, email them, say, hey, how's it going? I have a book coming out. Would love if you could drop a LinkedIn post about it. Love if you could drop an Instagram post about it, send an email about it. Or they might have their own podcast. Can I go on that? You're building up a roster. I have a good friend who she ran a podcast for years and years in the marketing agency space. And she has her first book coming out soon. I'm like, go every single one of them, spend 2 days and find a reason to email them and ask for the favor in return, because there's hundreds of people that are willing, happily in your debt for that. So that building up that base way before your launch would be awesome. In my moment now, where my book came out 6 months ago, I need to be on other people's audiences. I don't need to spend my time kind of building my own, infrastructure for that. I need to go out and get all those new eyeballs. But maybe in a year from now, I want to pivot back into okay, let me go build that network out again and have the joy of doing the podcast, maybe because there's another book or whatever else down the line.
Ben Gutman, a podcast is calling your name, brother. All right. I'll help you out. You come find me. All right. What do you say, Anne-Marie?
I sort of lost track of the question, to be honest.
Well, that's because of Ben. Ben was talking so much.
Ben,
Could have
come
been
on.
me. Could have been moderator error here.
So we're talking
it was
about
the ROI
ROI
on actually creating your own podcast.
on creating your own
Yeah,
podcast.
and versus other things you might suggest they do instead. So what's the ROI that you've seen on your clients creating their own podcast versus, and would you recommend that for them versus other things you could suggest they could do?
There are very few clients that I would suggest creating their own podcasts. Very, very few. I have one client in particular who I came up with her podcast idea. She took it, ran out on her own, and now 3 years later, I'm back in producing it. She is a badass in her genre, and you want to be invaluable to your industry and to your specific space, your industry. So to me, that's great ROI if you're willing to put the time in. If you love what you do and you're building a platform, why even worry about the ROI? I mean, the ROI is everything that Rob and Ben talked about. It's those connections, it's being invited to panels and keynote speakers, it's getting additional clients. And I mean, that's what I see the podcasting as being, why it's important. I mean, if you wind up getting advertising dollars, good for you, but that's a whole other business now.
But what about the most of clients you suggest don't do it? Like, why do you say that? And what do you suggest they do instead if they're not willing to put in that amount of work?
I don't think it's an either or. It's not an either or. I have to look at every client as an individual and what they're trying to accomplish overall with their goals. So, I mean, it could be a variety of different things. Some clients, one of the most important question I ask them at the get-go is, what is their goal for the book? And then from there, I build out my campaigns. So I'm not always suggesting that people go out and podcast. It could be other things. There could be people who really enjoy just writing and want to put more books out, or there are people who want to go on the speaking circuit as well. So, and that's when I have to step out of the equation a little bit. Or Ben talked about article writing. There are clients who just exclusively want to write articles to get placed with the media. So it's not an either or thing. I think it takes a special person to want a podcast and to be able to talk a lot and to be able to meet new people every single day and to kind of be on the edge of your seat. I find that very exciting, but a lot of people do not.
As do I. And Martin, you almost had your own podcast there. Lots of really great questions. All right, we're down to 5 minutes. Could I just remember, I'm the how guy. I want to give you a couple of hows, and then we'll swing back and get some questions. So let's get 2 concrete hows going. Here's one. And Ben, I'm going to let you start out again. 2 actionable items that you would recommend. If you said, do these 2 things and you'll be a great guest, what would they be?
So number 1 is you're going to forget everything you ever wrote in your book as soon as the mic goes on. So I keep a note open at all times. That's like my cheat sheet. And it has I have 5 principles in my book. I have them in there. I have examples. I have a couple quotes that I like to use. Wherever I have kind of like a framework or a list, I try to make sure I have that accessible. I also keep the book as a PDF open right next to me, so I can do a quick Command F to find something if somebody's referencing a specific quote. So that's number 1, is keep those 2 things handy right there in the window. And number 2, and this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, you don't actually have to answer the question that they ask you. So this is like kind of the big kind of dirty secret in like media or politics, is that just watch any politics. you have the thing you want to say. Somebody's question might not be a great question. It may be into territory you don't want to get into. It may be a topic that you don't feel you remember the story off the top of your head. You can kind of answer, throw a few words at it and then pivot that into the talking point that you have. It's not going to be as good as if you really kind of hit the home run with it, but it's much better to get that kind of foul ball than it is to just whiff on that question.
Good.
So
Excellent.
precious.
Yep, you're getting some applause on that one. Anne Marie, two tips.
So I see a lot of laziness happening, and I think it's important to really understand who you're speaking to before every single interview. Don't rely on exclusively what your PR person is giving you, or your booker, or your marketing agency. Go out and do the research yourself. Understand what the cadence of those interviews, what that's like. Find out something that you can relate to with that host, or with the reader, or with the listenership. And yeah, same thing. You have to be prepared and know your talking points, but be able to sort of end on something that listener can just take away that's memorable. Back in the day, when at PR firms, when I was, in my 20s, and we'd have a long list of media that we'd have to contact, we would call it smiling and dialing, right? So I could pitch 5 different clients to 50 different members of the media in one day. And I always had a script in front of me all the time. What are the most important things that this member of the media or this listenership audience needs to know about me, about my book, about my business?
Perfect. And I'll throw, first of all, I kind of want to throw a check mark on something Ben said, because I do the same thing. Keep some notes handy. Put it right on the screen. Put it right over. You don't really have to look at me. I wouldn't mind if you look at me, but you don't have to look at me while we're talking. Look at your notes, but just put a word or two down when something's going off in your head while we're talking, so that you don't miss the conversation that we're having, and then either miss the answer or say the same thing I just said to you. I do it all the time, so I can just put a word down. I got it, and focus on Ben. Number 2, you want to be a great guest? Promote the podcast. It
Yeah.
frustrates me that I get guests on there that do have big social media numbers, and I don't even get a like when I've included them on the LinkedIn, put their name on there. I know they see it, not reshared, not liked, nothing. 350 podcasts, 5 guests have been booked twice. Guess what they did that made me want to book them a second time, besides being really good? They promoted it. We're looking for that. Want to be a great guest? Promote the podcast that you're on. And the second thing, it's a little technique. I call it, what do I call it? I call it the slow drop and stop move. Okay. Sometimes I don't want to step on you. You don't want to step on me. I did a lot of radio before podcasts, just as a guest. When you start slowing your answer down and you drop your voice a little bit, I know you're finished. So that slowing it down and dropping it actually gives me a cue. On radio, I could never see the person. I had to wait. But if you're just going, I don't know if you're done, but if you go, then that's how you do it, because Mars is a very hot planet. I know you're done. So that would be just maybe a technique I throw in there. Okay, slow, slop, and drop. Ben's got his finger up. Yes,
Sorry,
Ben.
Okay, I'll give you real quick a little, like, very, very tactical piece. Get a good microphone. I'm upstate at my other house, so this is not our best microphone. Get a good microphone. Make sure your lighting is good. Close all your tabs. Go on the focus mode on your computer. Make sure you have a physical copy of your book within reach at all times. I just keep it under my monitor so that you can kind of, handle it. Make sure you have the following things always memorized. Number 1 is, what is a question that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? Just have something that's kind of that you can answer, because everybody asks that one. Number 2, what is like a one tool that you can tell the audience that they can go away with? Make sure you have that example. Number 3 is, what is the one takeaway that you want people to have? Because everybody also asks that question, which is, if people remember one thing about this, what should it be? And the last one is, make sure you have a tight little, like, where can they find you answer at the end of it.
Yeah, a nice drop on that one, by the way. A slow drop and stop by Ben just now. Becky, I'm really glad you put that in the comment area. If we weren't hustling to the finish line, but I got to read that one out. Please, okay? watch, don't talk too long. That's, remember, did you notice this that when we started, we've been on sort of a communication shot clock. I hope you enjoyed it, but we got a lot of thoughts out.
You're over
because-
your time right now, sir.
Well, but I'm going to finish this thought first. I didn't say we would finish on time. I said we'd move quickly. In any case, but you can see that we get that. That's what you want out of a podcast, that speed. So thanks for putting that in there, Becky. About 90 seconds. We can ask you the meaning of life. 90 seconds. If it's good, we'll ask more questions. All right, Sarah. Thank you for stopping us. We only went 1 minute late. We weren't that bad. But back to you, Sarah. I hope you guys enjoyed the panel. Hey, thanks so much, Ben and Anne-Marie. Great job. Really appreciate it.